is quite interesting to talk about it. If I haven't met, I think these are all, you all are familiar faces at this point. If I haven't met you before, though, I'm Kenny. I live here in Poolesville, um, kind of a amateur historian, generally focused on old homes in the ag reserve. A lot of the historic homes around us, and kind of exploring them and talking about them here with you all. Um, this topic, obviously, the Pepco power plant is not a old home. However, the introduction of this power plant into our backyards had some significant implications with old homes in the area, and so we'll certainly get into that and talk about that, and kind of maybe the future of what's going to happen out there on that power plant property. So on this title screen, I just, I spent a little bit of time going through some of the newspaper articles around in the late 1950s, early 1960s, because I was just curious to get a better sense of kind of what was the conversation locally about the power plant being built. And it's really interesting. If I think if today a company came in and said that they were going to build a power plant here in the ag reserve, I would imagine that it would be nothing but torches and pitchforks, right? I don't think that it would be very well received. But in 1959, when the power plant was built up here in Dickerson, I'm not sure that local residents were necessarily happy about it, but it was certainly seen as a massive win for Montgomery County and for the state of Maryland. Um, and Pepco, just based on looking at some of the articles, it is kind of interesting at how much of an ad campaign Pepco did to kind of talk about this new plant that we were all getting, and kind of represented as all the new capabilities through power that we would receive as a result. This picture here is just one example of one of those advertisements. So what prompted this? I've been interested in this story before about the power plant and about historic homes that we lost as a result of the power plant being built. And to be clear, in case any of you worked at the power plant, nothing against it or anybody that worked there, totally cool with that. I just think it's worth remembering what was on this property before the power plant was there, just for posterity's sake. But 2 weeks ago, I went out with my 10-year-old. You can see him kind of wading through this unexpected swamp that we found ourselves in. We went out looking for a old farmhouse, and it is the Trundle Farm. And you can see in this left-hand picture, this is my rough estimation of the route we took. And if you've never been out to the Dickerson Conservation Park off of Martinsburg Road, I really recommend it. It's a really great place to access the C&O Canal. But when you're driving on the little, it's kind of almost a little entry. It's not really a road. It's kind of a driveway into the parking lot area there. There's kind of a turn and there's a little parking spot. And there's a trail that goes off into the woods. And it's kind of, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but where it says Dickerson Conservation Park and then going straight up into the woods, it's there's a trail there for sure. It's a bit overgrown. There's a lot of thorns. It's not necessarily an easy walk to make, especially if you don't want your clothes torn open with from thorns. But it's very clear that there is a pathway there. And what that actually is the remnants of what was probably a dirt driveway that was attached to a farm that was owned by the Trundle family. Okay. And so my understanding is that off in these woods somewhere, the at least the chimney of this Trundle farmhouse is still out there, just kind of in the middle of the woods, overgrown. And my 10-year-old Sawyer and I, on a couple of occasions now, have gone out in search of this chimney. We have yet to find it. I'm hopeful that at one point we will. But we went out 2 weeks ago and we kind of walked this trail all the way back. And when you hit up to this, like what looks like a road here on the map, it's actually a chain link fence that separates the the power plant property from the state property of the Dickerson Conservation Park. And so we kind of then walked along the fence line and then down towards the canal. This is kind of where we found ourselves in some swampy water, and then kind of made our way back to the car. And it was a really good time, really cool adventure. Came up empty-handed in terms of finding what we were looking for, but it's had me over the last 2 weeks just thinking about this land, thinking about what was here, and thinking about how kind of the power plant ties into it and the implications of it. And just to really show, I mean, it's the power plant, the Pepco power plant, which was built in Dickerson in 19, or it came online in 1959. So construction started shortly after this picture on the left. You can see, I mean, it takes up a sizable amount of acreage. I think initially when it was purchased by Pepco, it was 700 acres. I think it's grown now. The footprint over the decades has grown to, I think it's a little bit over 1,000 acres in total. And that's the power plant area. And then on the right, what you can also see down towards the bottom there are, I believe, what are the coal ash mounds from the coal that is the ash from the coal that was burnt at the power plant after they're done with it. And so that is also there, which obviously is not in the picture on the left from the 1950s. So just this side by side is really just meant to give you a sense of the changing landscape, right? If you're having a hard time figuring out kind of where on the map we are, obviously in kind of the upper left, we've got the Potomac River. And then if you see kind of this white line that's running and then it makes this sharp turn, that sharp turn right there is the yellow blinking light, right? I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have passed under that light many a times going towards Dickerson from Poolesville. So that is kind of that sharp turn. And then the power plant's out here. All right, so before the power plant is built, oh, where's the quarry? Everybody always wants to know where the quarry is. All right, I will show you all. Don't get me in trouble, though. I always get yelled at when I talk about the quarry. The quarry, so here's the sharp turn. If you go straight up, the quarry is these two bodies of water, right? So if you look at it on the right side picture, it's a little bit more clear. It's that there's two quarries. There's the big one and the smaller one. The smaller one is older. Both were shut down in early 1900s. They've been out of play for a long time, but always a fan favorite stop for local teenagers, much to the owner's chagrin. But that's where that is. And then, just for the sake of further orientation, if you look at the very top of the map, you can kind of see this line kind of running out across. That is the railroad tracks, and then this kind of area up here is the town of Dickerson. Okay, so how did this Pepco plant end up in our backyard, right? I mean, when you look at it, I think this is what's fascinating to me about the power plant is it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean, it's this huge industrial site that is in this super rural, really tucked away, kind of largely forested area of the ag reserve. And so how did that come to be? So in the 1950s, there was a recognition in primarily Montgomery County and Prince George's County that there was not an adequate power supply, especially as we were building more and more suburbs in the 50s, moving into the 60s around DC. There was a recognition that to keep up with the building of these homes and businesses and infrastructure, there needed to be more power generation. And so both Maryland and Virginia were essentially lobbying Pepco to build within their states. The reason that both states really, really wanted Pepco to build was because the states would receive a significant amount of money and tax incentives to bring Pepco into their state lines. And what's fascinating is that Virginia actually got out to an early start, and they actually convinced Pepco to build there. Pepco said, okay, we're going to build this site in Virginia. Let me see here. Yeah, so the two visions at play were, the state of Maryland wanted to build it up in Dickerson, where it ended up being. Virginia wanted to actually build it down south here. If any of you have ever been to Algonquin State Park, that was initially intended to be the site of the power plant. That's where it was going to be built. And Pepco, agreed with Virginia's initial bid. They actually put down, I think it was $25,000 as kind of a good faith, payment up front to kind of say, hey, we're going to build in Virginia on that land. And it was when they kind of made that initial kind of declaration of, okay, we're going to Virginia, that a lot of the forces at play in Maryland really kind of came out to fight for Pepco to reconsider. And there were a couple of primary and apparently strong enough arguments to cause Pepco to reconsider. The first was that there were environmental concerns from individuals. Okay, so there's a question about, so did on the Potomac have any advantage? I assume you mean, so both sites on the Potomac, the reason that they needed to build on the Potomac was because what they do on these sites is they pool in water from upstream to cool the infrastructure, and then they pump out the warm water from the back end. So if you've ever been up to the Dickerson power plant, if you're on the C&O Canal, actually behind it, you can see it. There's like an offshoot where they're pumping out that warm water. And a number of years ago, they actually put in these cement boulders, and now it's, I think, the U.S. Not canoeing but kayaking training center up there, because it's really strong currents. It's always coming out of the power plant. It's warm water, and so either way, the site was going to be right on the Potomac for that water source, right? So the reason that Maryland was able to get Pepco to reconsider was a couple. First was there were concerns from downriver about the environmental impacts and the potential chemicals that the plant would be pumping back out into the river. And so, and I'm not an environmental scientist. I don't know how legitimate it is, but there was some argument that being further upriver, I mean, it's a couple of miles, it's not that far, but I guess it matters in this case. Being further upriver and around this bend would further protect downriver residents, right? I guess they didn't care too much about us living up in here. So that was one reason. So it was kind of a environmental pollution issue. The other and the big reason was that the Maryland governor was kind of like, hey, all of this power is going to residents of Montgomery County and Prince George's County, regardless of where it's built. The power is for Maryland residents. So we feel like this plant should also be built in Maryland, right? This is where we want you to do it. And then I believe kind of the last reason was just that there seemed to be less kind of counter forces in Maryland fighting against the development of this site, which I think is kind of funny, because there's actually in these newspaper articles, these residents of Loudoun saying, hey, we don't want this plant to come. It's going to be the first sign of development, and we don't want to develop here. And the people on the Maryland side are saying, hey, bring it on. We're gonna actually start up a bunch of other communities around the power plant. There's gonna be a lot of jobs created, which I think is interesting, because in the 70 years since this took place, we've kind of flipped roles here, right? The ag reserve obviously has not been developed to the extent that that Loudoun County across the river has been. So kind of some of those feelings around development have certainly changed over time. So anyway, so Maryland convinces Pepco that no, you should build here. And so they say, okay, fair enough. They buy this 700-acre tract of land up in Dickerson. I think this is around 1956, 57, and they immediately get to work on building this plant. This article on the right I thought was interesting. It talks about there were housing developments in plans to be built. They described them as at the base of Sugarloaf Mountain, within 2 miles of the power plant. So it looks like there were developers that were ready to start building some communities right near the plant, both in view that, obviously the plant would have a workforce, but also that more industry would pop up. I'm not completely sure what happened to those plans. Those developments obviously did not come to fruition. This is, of course, before the ag reserve as we know it as a legal construct was created in the 1980s. So a lot of the kind of the restrictions on zoning and building that we have in place today were not in place back then. So I don't know that it was necessarily like a zoning issue at that point in time. But for whatever reason, these developments were not built in close proximity to the site. Yeah, so the plant is completed or operational in 1959. They had a dedication ceremony. You can see with 500 people present. The governor of Maryland was here to give a speech about how this was just another step forward in Maryland's economic development plans. And initially, when the plant was built, it was generating its power based purely off of coal that was coming in on railroad cars. Later on, they also brought in the ability to make fuel out of both oil and gas, which is how they still generate power today. Okay, so here, this is the map from 1950s, and you can see this is right before the construction begins. And what I really want you to notice here is, and I know it's small, but as you look down from pretty high up elevation wise down in this area, you can see a number of farmsteads in this footprint, right? So in the bottom right, there's there's another one out here. There's at least probably 4 or 5 farms, which are essentially historic homes. At this point in 2024, they would be historic homes. When we go back into some of our older maps of the area, this is the Martinet and Bond map, which I use all the time. This is from 1865. This red square is essentially the footprint of where the ferry is built, and you can see that there are a number of farms in the area. Most significantly to notice are the Trundle names and the Shreve names down at the bottom. The Shreves and the Trundles, both pretty prevalent, I guess I would say, families in the area, longtime farmers in the area. The Trundle family is maybe best known in terms of homes in the area. They're the ones that actually built Annington, which is that big old home down by White's Ferry. They were quick when there was a transition from tobacco to wheat, right around the turn from the 1700s to 1800s. The Trundles jumped on that transition really quickly and very smartly and made significant wealth off of that. And as a result, the Trundles were relatively prosperous farmers throughout the area, and they had a number of farms in this region, in this footprint. And I see a question about did these farms prosper as a result of the power plant coming in, right? Which we'll get to, but my understanding is that the farmers or the individuals who own this land, the land was essentially purchased first by the county, so they made some money off of that, and then the county sold the land to Pepco to build the plant. So they were compensated. Although I will say one of the interesting things that I uncovered in looking at some of the old newspaper articles was when I'm sure you all have noticed, but there's super large power lines running out of the Pepco plant, and they kind of cut across a bunch of fields, and they've got to clear the tree lines underneath them. That was done under eminent domain, and that made a lot of people around the area very, very upset, especially farmers, because now if you've got a power line running through the middle of one of your fields, you cannot plant underneath it. And if it's being, if it's just being taken from you, I could understand being quite frustrated with that. Yeah, Phil's asking, did the plant burn trash for a while? Yeah, they did. They still might. I'll be completely honest. It's hard for me to understand exactly what is currently happening out there. But yes, for at least a period of time, they were burning the county's trash out there. They were actually bringing trash in on uh, railroad cars and then burning it there in an incinerator. And then just another look through historic maps. So here's 1879. This is, again, the footprint, just showing you that primarily trundles, shreves. You can see the Jones farm out here, which I think is one of the farms we were looking at in that earlier picture. Yeah, so here's a closer view of the site in the 1950s. I think this out here is that Richard Jones farm that we were just looking at. This I know was a Shreve family farm. I think a Trundle down here, and I forget what family was out here. But anyway, you've got all of these different farmsteads out in this area. Down south here, this is where I was walking with my 10-year-old. So this is actually outside of the Pepco property. You can see like there's this driveway that goes to what is likely a house. That's that house that I've been looking for and not been able to find. And then this is a picture, I think in 1970. So you can see that kind of the initial coal-fired plant here is operational. What we're looking at, obviously the Potomac running across the top, and you can see kind of above the plant here, there's kind of this like black circle. That is kind of the pile of coal that has been brought in by the trains, and then they're going to bring that into the burners to generate the energy. And then you see this line coming out of the plant going down to the Potomac. That is that hot water discharge that I was talking about. After the water has been used to cool things on the inside, they're discharging it back out. This is where that course for the kayakers it currently exists, right? It's kind of interesting. Just a complete side note that I guess is kind of related, but when I was in Iraq in the Army, I was actually, the base I lived on was a power plant that looked very, very much like this. It had this, it was the exact same structure, had the same kind of hot discharge into the Euphrates River. But so I just remember being there kind of on that power plant and thinking like, this is weird. This is, it feels like I'm in Dickerson, but of course I am not. But very similar setup. Here it is later in the 70s. So you can see, again, the main part of the plant, and then the footprint is starting to expand here. You can see kind of running up around the side. This is the C&O Canal running up through here. And I believe that as part of the agreement, when Pepco built the plant, they also agreed to do or invest some money to help some restoration efforts on part of the canal. At least that was part of the agreement. I'm not sure if that work actually took place, but I saw some newspaper articles talking about that as well. Here it is I think this is 1993. So you can see it's, expanded. We've got more facilities kind of out on the periphery. We've got, I think the trash burning plant is down in the bottom portion here. A lot of coal up here for the burners. And then this is, a more within the last 10 years shot of the site. So when I was mentioning earlier, kind of walking in the woods, these were these woods that we were in. and this is kind of like the perimeter line where the fence is. So we know that there was a farmstead down in here, and then we also know that there was at least 3 or 4 kind of scattered throughout here that were all demolished when they built the site. So what did we lose? And again, I guess I would say at this point I'm probably not a huge fan of development in the ag reserve. But I also understand that there are times when it's necessary and makes sense. So I don't say this to say anything negative about the power plant being there, but I do think it's worthwhile ensuring that we do catalog kind of what was here before the plant um, was built. So what you're looking at here is actually south of the plant. This is so if you look at this right side picture, in the upper right, there's kind of this place where the roads meet kind of in this three-way stop. So I think this is, I'm going to say it's Martinsburg Road where it hits Weishi Road. So that's kind of out towards Dickerson. And if you kind of go down towards the river from there, you'll if you blink, you'll miss it. And even if you look, you still might miss it because it's really overgrown now. But let me see. You'll see this picture here on the right. You'll see there's this gate there. I took this picture a couple of years ago. And this gate is essentially right here. And what it marks is what was the tree-lined driveway to the Dr. Shreve home. And you can see here on the left, this is from the early 90s. You can see Dr. Shreve's home here. It's kind of built kind of in that like almost crucifix or cross shape. And then there was a bunch of outbuildings out behind it. Shortly after this picture was taken, in fact, I think in this picture, the parking lot's already being built here, but shortly after they started building these mounds to essentially store this coal ash. So you can see it more clearly here on the left. This is right after the home has actually been taken down, right? So you don't, that house is no longer present. Compare on the left here and then on the right, and it's gone. And you can see, I mean, it's an interesting thing to look at. If you every time I drive down here, I always stop and just kind of walk up to the fence and look through, because you can see kind of what was a tree lined driveway. It's still tree lined. It's just at this point, it kind of goes to nothing because the house is no longer there, which is kind of sad. And I've told this before, but in the early 1990s, my dad and I were out in these roads, and I remember spent some time going back to explore an old house at the end of a driveway like this. And and to be clear, like we probably were trespassing, but I'm pretty sure that we've passed the number of years that we need to stay out of trouble with this. But we were looking around, we weren't doing anything bad. But I've thought about that, and my dad and I have talked about that before, because it was this really cool old house, and it had this smokehouse, and it was clearly nobody was living there, but it was just kind of out there, and we've never been able to find it again. He doesn't remember exactly where we were. I was maybe 6 or 7, so I don't remember where it was on the road, but I'm pretty sure, based on our discussions since then and the description and just looking at this place, that it was this house. And it was likely torn down pretty shortly after we were there, because this was probably early 90s when this came down. So anyway, this was the Dr. Shreve house. It was a cool old home that's no longer with us. And then you can see up here in the center part, we had the Shreve farm. This was in the records, this is described as a 1.5-story home. I don't think it's this structure. I think that there was probably a farmhouse, and this is an outbuilding, or honestly, potentially even an enslaved quarters or a summer kitchen. It's kind of big for a summer kitchen. I would just, given the presence of the chimney and the windows and the door, it looks more like a living quarters to me, but that's open to interpretation. So this building would be right in the center of the footprint. I don't know for sure that it's not standing any longer. It's hard for me to imagine that it is, but unfortunately, it's not exactly easy to go onto a power plant site and ask to look around. So my guess is that it's gone. This is the those woods that I was mentioning earlier that I've been looking for this old Trundle farm in. And so if you look at the right side picture, this black line kind of running up the screen, that is that's the canal, right? So the towpath is kind of right next to it. Down at the very bottom, that's the parking lot to access the canal. And if you kind of work your way back up to where this kind of curves, you can it's really hard to make out. I guess on this left picture, it's this driveway that goes that went to the farmstead. um, Again, you can kind of make out the trail at this point. It's very covered with prickers and briars and whatnot. That's where we were doing some exploring in search of finding this lost home or the chimney that's still there. Have been out there a couple times, haven't found it yet, but I'm convinced we will if it's out there still. This is what I'm looking for. This is how it looked in the 1970s. So it's been a couple of decades since it looked like this, and it's already in rough shape. So there's a decent chance that it's just a pile of bricks out there or stone out there somewhere. But I'd like to get to try to see if I can identify where that is. And then I think one of the really sad losses is we're pretty sure that a lot of the Trundle family was buried in the Trundle family cemetery out on this property. And my understanding and talking with Glenn Wallace, who's been on here, and we've talked about this cemetery a bunch of different times. Pretty sure it was essentially paved over when they built the power plant. I don't think that we have any, at a lot of other cemeteries throughout the ag reserve, remains were moved to Monocacy Cemetery. But I don't know that we have any indication that that's the case here. So many of the original Trundle family members in the area are very likely buried somewhere on that property where the power plant is. So kind of a sad story. Unfortunately, that's a fairly common story with development. There's a lot of examples of this up in Frederick County where cemeteries are, especially back in the 1950s, we just weren't doing as good of a job marking these types of historic sites. They weren't carrying the same level of significance that I think we place on them today and should place on them. And so it's likely just kind of lost to development in this case. Okay, so what's interesting is just in the last year, this site has been bought up by a company. I think they're called Terra Innovations or Terra Technology Group or something. And this organization has a number of plans for the site. My understanding, at least the last that I saw the plans based on working with Montgomery Countryside Alliance and Sugarloaf Citizens Association, is that they kind of want to operate more as like property managers for the site. They don't actually want to run a business on the site. And what they are doing is advertising the property. And what they really want to do is build a bunch of data warehouses on this property. It sounds like they would take down the all of the energy generating infrastructure. So you would not see, the large smokestacks that you can kind of see from all over the local area. Those would likely at some point go away based on their plan. But they are also working to be, I think they need to be granted some certain zoning approvals or exceptions to do some of the things that they're looking to do with data centers. For those of you not familiar with data centers, they are essentially just large warehouses that are are used to store the massive amounts of data that we all use every single day on the internet. Um, the the concern with, I mean, on one hand, it's the property has already been developed, right? And so I guess I would prefer, if they're gonna do something like that, they do it here as opposed to purchasing new land and building it on new green land. But the concern is just that data centers do take up a significant amount of energy. They also need a significant amount of cooling. That's the other reason I think that they want to be on the Potomac. I think a lot of the cooling infrastructure for the power plant would probably somehow be used in this situation. But this is very much kind of an active conversation that we're having in MCA with our SCA teammates, and really just kind of watching as these plans come to play. So, if this is something that's of interest to you that you want to kind of stay involved with, or you've got concerns with or strong views on, let me know, and I'm happy to kind of add you to the MCA distro, where I think they're going to be sending out different advisories and progress and how things are going with this. And then the last thing I just wanted to point out was, and my guess is that at least some of you got the notice, and I'll see, maybe Beth, we can, if you all are cool with it, we can send this out to the seniors distro. But Historic Medley District, I am a board member of. The organization is turning 50 this year, and so we're going to be celebrating out at Ballycliff Farm on May 9th. So the tickets, I'll send the link to purchase tickets. I'm not going to lie, the tickets are not cheap, because it is a fundraising event. So I just want to kind of throw that out early. But we've got a really great lineup of awesome food, an open bar, which is kind of awesome, and really good music from No Stoplight. And it's just going to be a really good evening May 9th, it should be great weather. I don't think the sun goes down until almost 9 p.m. And really hope that many of you will come out and enjoy that evening. I think it's going to be a really good time. So I just wanted to make a really strong pitch for that, because I know many of you are interested in local history, and this is a great way to support it. All right, questions?
Kind of a personal anecdote, Kenny.
Yeah.
My late dad was a manager at Pepco. Now, when Dickerson opened up, he would have only just started working there like in '53 when he got out of the Navy. But he was a member of the systems planning group, and he told me, after we had moved out here to Poolsville, shucks, 30 some odd years ago, he told me how he used to come out to the firehouse there in Bellsville to have citizen engagement discussions regarding Dickerson. And I'm imagining it was probably tied to those power line real estate issues. But he said he came out quite a few times speaking with the citizens that were concerned and or just had questions about it. So it's kind of interesting to see your talk tonight. So thanks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I also get the sense that, for good reason, there's been a lot of concerns over the years just with what does it do to our drinking water and air quality with this type of facility in relatively close proximity. To maybe answer my own question earlier when I said, like, how did this big industrial facility end up out here in the middle of nowhere? Back, like, maybe that's by design, right? You kind of put it out here, and it's kind of out of the way for most people in the county, but it's our backyard. So yeah.
And if they're talking about building data centers, I guess that would imply the end of any kind of power generating operations out there.
Yeah. So yes. And so, like I said, like, I'm not completely sure what kind of power is being generated at the site right now. I know that they shut down all of the coal portions of the plant in 2020. So there's no more coal going into the site. But at that point, they were still generating energy off of oil and gas. So and so I don't know if they still today are, but my sense based on just looking at kind of the plans from this new, property owner is that there will not be necessarily energy production moving forward. At least that's my current understanding, but I definitely could be proven wrong. But yeah, I'm not sure who's making up for it. I don't, and there must be enough, plants elsewhere. I do know that, the new owners, one of the things that they want to do is have part of the property set aside for energy storage. So to like have power that they can sell back to the grid that they're so, but I'm not sure where that's going to come from.
This proposal is not a done deal, I guess.
No, no, very much not. I think actually it's quite early days. I think this is something really that popped up even like in the fall of 23. So I think this is just, I just raise it because I think it's still very much being kicked around as an idea. I will say these new property owners, I know that they did sit down and meet with MCA and SCA board members, which is generally a positive sign, right? Because in a lot of cases, the companies aren't real willing to do that. So that's at least a good sign they're willing to have conversations. But I know that there's still obviously a lot of concerns.
Back in the 60s, we used to go over there with my father's cattle truck and get all kinds of fly ash or the cinders that came out of the thing. They were giving it away. All you do is haul it away.
Really?
And we used to spread it on everybody's driveway. Figured it was a replacement for the gravel, except it has a very high acid content and it started to eat the truck up. Years
Yeah,
after that, they stopped it.
that's fascinating. I mean, I guess that's why they bury it in those mounds now, right? But that's funny. That's interesting. I wonder if there's any still like old driveways around here that are still, have a base of that coal ash underneath somewhere. That's funny. Huh.
We hauled it from here to Tawny Town.
Oh wow. Okay. So yeah.
Everybody had their driveways covered.
Yeah, apparently. That's a good drive. Anyone else?
Oh, I went and looked for that graveyard because it's on the Waterford map. And
Yeah.
guards let me in there. This was before 9/11.
Yeah. Yeah.
I went down to about where the first bend is in the road, and there was an old house there. All that was left of it was the roof. And according to that Waterford map, the graveyard was right behind it. And I looked everywhere.
Huh.
But it has one of Mosley's men buried in there.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll have to go look at that Waterford map myself. Yeah, as you're saying that, Jim, because I was thinking too, like, maybe there is an opportunity with these new owners to see if they'll if they'll let some of us on the property if they're gonna, if they're gonna take down the power stuff anyway, just to check it out for some of that historic stuff. I mean, my guess is that at this point, I mean, gosh, it's been more than 70 years since the plant, or about 70 years since it started. So it's I can't imagine that some of those old stone homes are still there, but maybe there's something remnants wise. But
Well, all I found was the roof to the house. I mean,
yeah,
everything was gone except in a pile of debris.
yeah, yeah. That's too bad. Huh. Interesting.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I want to thank you for coming in tonight, and just want to let you know that Kenny will be joining us for his next session in May, and we'll be going every other month from there on in. So please look for that those sessions to hear from Kenny about more of our area. Okay. Thank you for coming tonight. If there are no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and close out the meeting. And thank you, Kenny, very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Very
See y'all
interesting.
soon. See you.